That was the news theme that at 7:45 every morning we listen to in the John Eden breakfast program to usher in the 3DB 3LK news. And a man who is synonymous with 3DB, and I was there from, well, not from the beginning, but certainly for many years. Lawrence Costin is on the line. Good evening, Lawrence.
Greetings to you, Bruce.
And happy birthday. Well, should I say happy reunion?
And I tell you what, Bruce, it was a fantastic reunion. You wouldn't believe the number of people that showed up. There would have been at least 200 people.
Tell us some of the identities that you rubbed shoulders with at the 3DB reunion today, Lawrence.
Well, I'll tell you what, Bruce, the oldest on-air personality was a man called Jeffrey Palmer. And I believe he was on air in round about 1935, but there were several other people associated with the station that were there, I think, in 1931. In latter days, Dan Webb, of course, who moved to television in 1956, Mel Walden, who's with Channel 10, most of the race commentators, although Bill Collins sent his apologies, he couldn't make it. We also had an apology from John Eden and Jeff McComas, who is in Tasmania. Ron Casey, I believe, is ill. But an enormous number, Bruce, of people associated with the station were here. You know, I'm talking about technicians, office staff and so forth. And it's really been a wonderful day.
Here's Phil, Lawrence.
Lawrence, we've been looking forward to talking to you on Remember When, and we think this is a very good reason to do so. Thanks very much for staying back to talk to us tonight.
That's all right, Phil. It's a pleasure.
Tell us where it all started for you, because we associate you very much with news reading, but maybe it started in the country for you, did it?
Well, as a matter of fact, I remember when I was a young lad, I wanted to get into radio, and I said I would not go to the country. If I had to start in the country, I'd give radio away. I wouldn't be interested. So I went to the Vincent School of Broadcasting, and the guy said, no, only a country announcer for you. I said, okay, well, I'm not interested. So a few years later, I went to Lee Murray, and he put me through a course of voice production and so forth, and he said, listen, there's an audition going at the Argus Radio newsroom for a newsreader. So I said, okay. So I went up there, and luckily I passed that. And so I started in the Argus Radio newsroom in 1954, and I was anxious to get into a city station, mainly in the sporting area, because I felt I was better attuned to that. And I rang up Jeff McComas at 3DB and said, Jeff, is there a possibility of an audition there? He said, yes, come along. So I went to the audition, and about 20 other guys were there as well. And I did this audition. I read news and a bit of ad-lib and so forth, and a bit about myself. And luckily, I managed to get the job, and I was put on 6 months probation, and that was in November 1956. Well, I happened to get through the probationary period of 6 months, and I was there from 1956 until 1988, when the station was taken over, and I'm currently on a part-time basis with Double T FM in the sporting area.
Lawrence Costin, our special guest. Could you just explain to younger listeners, Lawrence, what the Argus newsroom was all about?
The Argus newsroom, Phil, was a central bureau that fed out a news bulletin to 3 stations. From memory, it was 3AK, 3KZ and 3UZ. It was headed by a man called Gordon Bell, who had a marvellous voice, and we used to read bulletins, I think about 4 or 5 bulletins a day from this studio in the Argus building on the corner of Latrobe and Elizabeth, this special studio. We'd write the news, of course, down in the editorial, and then we'd go up and read it. And we fed these 3 stations and I think a couple of country stations. And it's fast getting round to that again, Phil. I think eventually, with the way economics are today, that they'll have a central broadcasting, a news broadcasting network, and they'll feed stations with the same news.
Yes, I think Denzel Housen might have been there at the same time, Lawrence.
I don't remember Denzel Housen, but I think a chap called Roland Dejar, and I can't remember. There was about 3 of us there, but I know I was dead scared of Gordon Bell.
And of course he later went to 3DB and did the Dunlop Hour, and you would have been there at the same time with him.
Well, it was an extraordinary thing, Phil. I left before the Argus folded, which was in 1957, and when I left, Gordon Bell was my boss, and when he came to 3DB, he was my contemporary. So it was a great feeling, Phil.
Bruce here now, Lawrence. Tell us now, you've moved from the Argus newsroom into 3DB. What were your first duties there, Lawrence?
My first duties, Bruce, I was a junior announcer, and they shoved me straight onto a program at 11 p.m, 11 through 1 a.m, called Nightclub of the Air. Now, we didn't go all night then, so I was on from 11 till 1 and closed down the station, and I did that for some considerable time. But I also wanted to get into the sporting area, and I told Ron Casey at the time, who was there, that I'd like to coordinate the Saturday afternoon sporting service. So he said, righto, we'll give you a go. So I landed that job on Saturday afternoon, pushing buttons, of course, and coordinating the whole thing. And I was on that for 19 straight years, which I believe, Bruce, is a record.
Well, I was just adding up. If you started at DB in 1956, they've closed down transmission and now it's Double T.
Yes.
You have effectively almost been in the same station for 40 years.
Well, I think it's nearer 35.
But, well, even so, it's
36.
It's almost a record.
Listen, Bruce, do you mind if I claim that as a world record?
Well, I'd like you to, because I think you deserve it.
I think it might be. The one station, it is rather unique.
Lawrence, what does the name Mrs. Twit mean to you?
Well, listen, that's a funny thing you ask, because they happen to... I'm here at this reunion today, and what do? They put on this little news bulletin, a 2-minute news bulletin where I laughed all the way through it. It stemmed, Bruce, from the fact that we used to, on the hour, have a call to a listener and give them a free Tats ticket. Well, somebody threw in this name. I was on there about to read the 11 o'clock news, and somebody threw in calling Miss Twit of Glen Iris. Well, Bruce, it tickled my fancy. And I thought, I'm thinking of this name, Twit, as I'm reading the first news item. Well, I got through that all right, no problem. And then it kept coming back to me. And I thought, I started to laugh. And I started to laugh, and I couldn't stop. And I had a news item there from where a guy died in Singapore, and I burst out laughing. Well, you wouldn't believe it. I was never so happy to see the end of a 2-minute news bulletin.
In fact, I think, Lawrence, you went back to Heart of Oak to try and recover.
I threw to the theme. I said, I'm waving my hands, throw to the theme, throw to the theme. I almost collapsed. But the funny thing, you know, I never got one memo from the management, so I could only assume they found it as funny as everybody else.
Yes.
Lawrence Phillip again. Was that your worst moment in radio?
Well, I suppose that'd be my worst moment, but I was inclined to giggle a lot. I was easy to break up, and I'll tell you somebody, Phil, who was very adept at forcing a break-up, and that was Brian Naylor. He was a real devil, I'm telling you. I worked a couple of times with Brian Naylor on the other side of the desk, and don't worry, he'd break you up, but it's hard to see Brian breaking up, isn't it, on Channel 9 News?
Certainly is.
You would.
Yeah, it's Bruce again, Lawrence. Would you like to just whet our appetite, because DB was such an important part of our lives growing up in Melbourne? Just reminisce with us for a couple of minutes on some of the names and programs that were on when you started.
Well, now let me see. I did move into the morning area at one stage. We had that time-honoured program on at 9:30 called Hymns of All Churches.
Yes.
Very big listening audience among the nursing homes. And what else was there? Well,
Did you have any serials?
We had a lot of serials. Pollyanna. Let's see, there was Pollyanna. Oh, there were so many serials. I never used to listen to them. I just put them on.
Lavender Grove?
Yeah, that's right. Lavender Grove. Gee, you've got a good memory.
And I suppose the Happy Gang was still going.
Happy Gang, oh, definitely. The Happy Gang was big then because television hadn't quite taken off, and every Monday night in the passage of the old DB, you'd see this great line of people with dogs and cats and pigs and everything, and they're bringing them into the Happy Gang because the Happy Gang, somebody had called for, a dog with a bobtail or something, and you'd see all these dogs in the hallway. You couldn't move. I'm trying to get through to the studio to read the news, and you see all these people and all these animals. But the Happy Gang was a very, very popular, as you know, live radio show.
And Dick Cranbourne's Hillbillies on Sunday morning?
Yes, the country and western show, as they called it, it had a very big listening audience, and it'd have all the country and western folk in, and that was very, very popular. It rated well for many, many years.
Interesting, Lawrence Costin, our special guest at the 3DB reunion. Interesting, you started at 3DB in November 1956, which was also when the Olympic Games were on in Melbourne, and virtually was the commencement of television in this country. And yet, unlike 3DB personalities like Brian Naylor, Eric Pearson, Danny Webb, you chose in later years not to concentrate on television as they did. Why is this?
Well, we all 3DB announcers, Phil, did a lot of television because owned by the Herald and Weekly Times, Channel 7 as it was then, and 3DB, we used to, Channel 7 would say, look, we need a couple of fellas to do some commercials down here. Could you send somebody along? And so that meant we all worked on television, doing commercials and this, that and the other. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with World of Sport for about 10 or 11 years, and I did a lot of television work down there, which meant I worked 7 days a week, but it didn't matter. But we did a lot of television, and I think after, let's see, I'd been at 3DB about 4 or 5 years, and the program manager at the time offered me a job on television, and I accepted it. And the next thing I knew was that they wouldn't let me go. Now, whether there was some internal politics involved there or not, I don't know. But I was coordinating the Saturday afternoon sporting service, and we were a top racing station then. And whether they thought, well, we can't let him go or not, I don't know. But anyway, the wheels went round, and after accepting the job, they said, no, we want you here at 3DB, so I stayed.
Yes, well, the point I made was you didn't go full-time television like those others did.
No, Phil. Maybe I looked at it in the way that television may have been more insecure than radio, because I had a pretty good niche at 3DB, and a wonderful station to work for, as you well know.
Just through the hazy mists of my memories, I would, just for a personal moment, if you could just answer a question for me. I vaguely remember, as I was a keen student of radio in the 50s, I remember you doing a program called Addo, or something like that, where you played non-stop ads for an hour. Was that a dream, or did that happen?
That was actually a nightmare, Bruce. No.
Didn't happen?
Bruce, I don't remember a program like that. I did a program called Motor Magazine for about 7 or 8 years, but no, Addo, I've never heard of that.
I always thought that you did that. One afternoon, you said, look, we've got so many ads here to get through, I'll play them all back to back, and it had never been done before.
By James, I tell you what, I know that we used to have that many ads on the advertising log that there were times when we had to really thrust them through. I might have played 7 or 8 in a row, but
that could have been it.
Anymore.
Lawrence, after so many years at the one station and in radio, what are the biggest changes have you seen in radio over those years? Well,
the biggest changes has been the switch over from, say, your particular program, or talk radio, or personality radio, to one of almost back-to-back music. That's the change. I suppose society changes. I mean, progression and all that business, but, the changes, I don't think they're for the better. I think the type of program that you've got, is really marvellous, especially for, shall we say, an older listener. But this back-to-back music, and it's particularly the type of music, of course my age is showing now, but I don't think it's done radio much good.
Was there a tinge of sadness at the 3DB reunion today, Lawrence, that 3DB is no more, or do people just accept the inevitable?
Well, Phil, there was a tinge of sadness because they regarded 3DB in the same way as Louis B. Mayer regarded MGM. The home of movies in Hollywood, the nice family atmosphere, everybody loved each other. If you were in Hollywood, MGM was the studio. If you were in Melbourne, 3DB was the studio. I remember when I first got into 3DB, and people would say, you work for 3DB? Oh, you lucky thing, how did you get in? They were in awe. I took it with a grain of salt because I wasn't that familiar with all the other stations, but that was the esteem that they held the radio station in.
Well, look, Lawrence, we could talk to you for hours. I'm so glad we've made contact with you because you've painted such a lovely picture of the past and also of what happened today in that reunion, and I do thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Bruce, and it's been a great day.
And congratulations on all the high spots in your career, Lawrence Costin, and may they continue.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you so much. Lawrence Costin on today, the occasion being the the 3DB reunion. And we thank Lawrence Costin as our special guest.